Welcome to another episode of DD on the Spot. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Johnson. Before I get to our guests here today, I'd like to remind everyone that if you enjoy this content, to please give a like and subscribe down below. I'd greatly appreciate it. We have Monica Stenier on the podcast. She's a PNBA Miss Natural Olympia competitor. She's also a two-time World Women's Physique Champion. She's also an NPC National competitor. But most importantly, she's our current guest. Monica, thank you so much for being on.
Well, thank you, Ryan, so much for having me. Man, that sounds pretty good, everything you just said.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
absolutely.
I
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was gonna say, as everyone can see, definitely, and it's so great to have you on. But now, first, I gotta ask, because you're in Texas, what is the weather like down there?
You know what? I'm looking forward to the weekend. They say it's going to get up to the 80s. Today, it's only going to be in the 60s. So, if you're up in Minnesota, I'm sorry. I'm sure it's just a little bit cooler for you guys, but
Yep.
I can't complain. I lived for 14 years in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and one thing I learned to do is not complain about the weather anymore.
Okay, so before we get into your finish, I gotta ask. So, what were you doing in Scotland and Northern Ireland?
Crazy stuff. My husband and I had been married for 5 years. I was a news director for a TV station of all things. This was before I started the bodybuilding path, even though I'd been involved for 10 years in martial arts and other kinds of sports. But we decided to leave everything and actually go backpacking for 2 years around the world. So did that, and I would encourage, and I wasn't a spring chicken either. I was about 27 years old at the time. And we did that, and one thing led to another. I always say we left the States with no children, no ties, and we came back 15 years later with four little souvenirs. But what started off as 2 years just backpacking turned into a job opportunity for him and several things for myself. So we spent 5 years in Northern Ireland, got our green card, so to speak, or indefinite leave to remain, then moved. We'd always loved Scotland, went to Scotland, stayed there for another 8 years, and had two more children there. So I do have a son that has the right to wear a kilt because he was born there. So it was great. It was wonderful.
Now, I've had a Scottish person on the podcast for a band. How did you deal with those accents? I mean, that must have been hard for you sometimes to deal with the little communication problems.
And it's interesting. Are you talking about Scotland and Northern Ireland or the rest of the world? Because believe it or not, after living over there for so long, my accent started to change quite a lot. And even some of the words I was using. So, although when I come back here to the States, people would say, where are you from? It was a little, ugh. Now, for the rest of the world, we really made it a point to try to learn a couple of phrases and maybe up to 10 or 20 words in every single language when we went to these countries. And it was amazing how, how you say sometimes in France, oh, people are not friendly and this and that. That's not true. I mean, a lot of it has to do with your attitude, with whether you try or not. And by even listening and, oh, you're trying to speak our language. Okay, now it's like that's all I know. I remember we were in Egypt, which was amazing, and Morocco, and I'd learned a little bit of Arabic, and I would just say a couple of words, and then they start talking in Arabic. It's like, no, 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 just a couple of those words. But it was great.
Yeah, and that's totally awesome. It's just so great to have that world experience that so many people don't have. But going into like your health and fitness journey, what inspired you to make that change and adapt that lifestyle? What's your backstory?
It actually started off really early, and that's why I say if I can do it, I think everybody can. When I was about 2.5 years old, and I was actually diagnosed with celiac disease, which is gluten intolerance. I remember even my mother taking me to birthdays and picking me up either before the cake was cut or taking me after because I could not have cake. I could not. And we're talking, I know you haven't mentioned my age, which I love you for, but I'm actually very proud of it and happy to say it. I'll be 54 next
I
month.
was gonna
So,
mention it later, so everyone's jaw could drop and be like, "What? Are you kidding me? Like, that's ridiculous."
but
Yeah.
the interesting thing about that is, back 50 years ago, you didn't have all the gluten free products that you do nowadays. So if you had celiac disease, I would scratch, had a lot of skin stuff going on, bronchitis. It was really, really bad. And it was interesting because I really thank my mom. Um, instead of going the drug route, meaning, she's got to take this and you have to do that for her, she decided, no, I'd rather eliminate all the sources that will cause these allergies or that will cause these sensitivities and see what happens there. So, what happened is by the time I was a teenager, somehow, some way, it's as though my immune system was able to mature and to fight back. And what happened was, I don't have celiac disease right now at all. I can eat bread, I can eat everything. A lot of the allergies went away. I still am deathly allergic to cats. That's the only thing that I still do have. But I really thank her for that. Whereas I know a lot of other people who went the route of, okay, let's do the antihistamines, let's do a lot of the drugs growing up that were very important. The problem with that is that now, as adults, as older, all those just added to other complications because it never allowed for that immune system to do what it does naturally and on its own. And our bodies are an incredible thing. So that was that. I was 14 years old. I broke my elbow, was told I would never be able to straighten my arm again. Well, I personally didn't believe that and wanted to. I remember swimming was something that really, really helped with that. And I mean, I'm still double jointed and I can do everything that I was told I wouldn't be able to do. And then when I was 19 years old, I started doing martial arts. And within 3 months, I was a yellow belt. I'm about five. I was 5'2 3/4" back then. I'm a little shorter than that now, but that 3/4 is very important. That 105 pounds or something like that. And there was this big, big guy who was a red belt, and we were practicing a bit of sparring and a bit of sweeping. And he swept me the wrong way, and he completely tore my ACL. Now, I went at the time I was going to UT Austin. I was in college and I went to the health center and they saw what had happened. They said, "Well, you've completely torn your ACL. At this point, we don't recommend surgery. If you can rehab it to walk, that'll be okay." And the guy asked me, "So, how old are you now?" I said, "I'm 19." And the doctor said, "Another couple of years, you're really not going to be that active anymore. And you'll probably get married and have kids." And I remember looking at him at that point and saying, "Oh man, that's a challenge." And so I refused to give up. I learned to adapt. And when I finally did get my black belt, 6 years later, it was a huge deal for me because I'd been told, "You're not going to ever do martial arts again. You won't be doing a lot of these things." So fast forward, I didn't start bodybuilding until actually I was 45. I mean, I'd done a lot of other things in between, but partially because of some of the injuries I'd had, it's tough to go side to side, and I never got the ACLs fixed, and we can talk about that later until about 3 or 4 years ago. But that's where all of a sudden, I mean, I've always been involved in, having a healthy lifestyle, eating properly, but never got into the competition side of it and really focused on the nutrition and the workouts until about this is my 10th season competing. So it's been 10 years and I'll be doing my 26th show in June. So it's a few of those.
Wow, that's awesome. And I do just have to say, side note, you said that you went to the University of Texas, Austin. I'm a huge Nebraska football fan, so thankfully they're not in the same conference anymore. I was gonna say I have family that live there. I know I'm from Minnesota, but then as soon as I hear Austin, Texas, I was like, oh, Longhorns. I was like, damn. But yeah, they're not in the same conference anymore, so yeah, it's fine. So I have to add that little side note. But was it until you were 44 that you really started getting into the weight training aspect, or were you using weights before then, or what was that process like?
I remember in college taking my first weightlifting class, and it was just some fun thing. And that's where I learned how to bench and I learned how to squat. And, that was a lot of fun, but it was just a semester. Until then, I'd done a lot of martial arts. When I was a kid, I swam, I did gymnastics, a lot of outdoor sports, but I'd never really spent time in the gym per se. Then, once we when we were out and about, my husband did. So he was always really, really into going to the gym, and I'd look at him like, and I was like, I get so bored if I were to spend the amount of time you're spending in a gym. And I enjoy being outside, using the things that you have in your environment to do whatever kind of exercise that you want to do. So it wasn't really, yeah, until I was about 44, 45. I remember being in the gym, meeting a guy who had competed, and he looked really, really good. And I told him, I said, hey, how about why don't you a put a workout program together for me? By this time, my youngest, I've got four children. My youngest was already in first grade, so I had a little bit of extra time working a lot from home. I said, I can do this. And he looked at me and he said, okay, Monica, I'll put a program together for you, but if I do, you've got to get on stage and compete. And I looked at him and said, why? And he said, well, because then I know you'll be serious about it. And I said, okay, that's been the story of my life. Well, the mountain's there. Why not? And I thought, this is a great challenge for me. Let's go ahead and do this. And so this was in, I talked to him, it was October of 2009. I started seriously training right after in the new year, that January. And my first competition was June of 2010.
I just gotta say, everyone, October 2009. That was my second month of high school. So this is giving everyone a little bit of a backstory there. So yeah, imagine me as a freshman in high school. Yeah, so that was then.
Um,
Now, but yes, and that's just such a great story because we have so many guests that I have on there. They're like, oh yeah, I started when I was like 18 or whatever, like working out. But then it's great to have other guests on the show that like at any age you really can start and make that change. I mean, we've had people that have started at like 50, and we've had people that have started at all ages. So really, all it takes is just that dedication to really get into it. But I also love to ask, I always say if you were to walk into a gym with 100 people, there's 100 different ways as to how people get into shape, whether it comes down to their dieting, their nutrition, I mean, how many reps they do, what exercises they do. There's so many little things that add up to the overall package that I don't think the general public understands. They just think that if you walk in and, if you work out, you can still look really great, but they don't realize all the other things that play a part. But was that a struggle for you getting started, just sort of figuring out what exercises and what nutrition really work best for your body specifically?
You're so right about that, Ryan. And depending, I mean, fitness is a huge, huge, broad gamut. And I really believe it's about being fit for your purpose. First of all, it's deciding, what do I want to do? My kids, for example, I've got a tennis player, I've got an elite tumbling and trampolinist, I've got a soccer player, who have done different things at different times. For me, it was the bodybuilding. My sister's a ballet dancer, so very, very, very different ways of going about and looking at it, and what you need to do to excel specifically in that. So I totally agree with what you're saying. When I went into the gym initially thinking, okay, now I'm going to compete. And this is not, you've got to separate it out. They're the power lifters that are in the gym, and they're doing specific training to powerlifting. Their diet is going to be completely different. Um, you have the CrossFitters, and I did do CrossFit for a couple of years and loved it. And I think that's what sort of initially got me right before competing. But the minute I started to train for bodybuilding competition, I actually had to leave CrossFit because they were not necessarily compatible. Now I think I could do them both because I've had enough time to figure out how. But whereas CrossFit is, you're exercising with as few exercises as possible, as many muscle groups as possible. With the bodybuilding, it's the exact opposite. Every single little muscle, is it the front? Is it the side? Is it the back? Is it this little thing coming out here? So, and for powerlifting, completely different again. For bodybuilding, you're not necessarily, of course, you're going to be strong, but it's not the kind of strength that you need for powerlifting. So, while initially, when you're first starting out, you want to lift heavy, eventually later on, now 10 years into it, I don't like to lift that heavy. And I find that using techniques, for example, like time under tension or drop sets or timing and really, really, really squeezing or using my body and knowing, really feeling, which doesn't happen for the first several years. This is, like I said, I've been in it for 10 years. And every year it's as though, wow, the light bulb is going on this or that. And then, that's just the training side of it. The diet, 80%.
Yep.
The nutrition that you're putting. And so remember earlier I said, okay, so nutrition for somebody who is like my daughter that was doing tumbling and trampoline, when they're or my son who is for an hour and a half running across the field, it's very different than for somebody who is bodybuilding and exerting for a certain amount of time but not really that much. So the amount of protein, the amount of carb, the amount of fats, all that varies and changes, and it's also knowing what suits your body, male, female, and just what kind of, what fuels you.
100%. I mean, I honestly I couldn't agree more. And I've had, powerlifters and CrossFit people on. And first of all, with CrossFit, some of those diets that they tell, they don't even really have diets. They basically can sort of get away with eating a lot more that they want. So then I said, like, yeah, if you tried CrossFit and then did bodybuilding, that might be a little bit different. But I always say some of these CrossFit competitors, especially the elite ones, they look like they could compete in a show the very next day after their competition just because they are just so lean down. But yeah, it's just, and I always say, if you were to have like a bench press or a weightlifting competition at a bodybuilding show, people would be shocked normally by, first of all, because they're so depleted that these people aren't as strong as they look like they're doing. And I always said, like, the power lifters, a lot of times you could walk into one and you wouldn't think that they're like super strong just by the way they look, but then next thing you know, they're benching like 300 pounds and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess you are very strong. So it's just, there's just a big misconception with that. But I also love to ask, because everyone's genetics are different, so what was one body part when you were getting started in the gym that really took off, that you didn't need to train as much? And then what was one body part that lagged behind that you had to train to overdrive? I'll give you mine. So I mean, my back, I've had jobs, all throughout college where I was lifting, packages into trucks. So I have a back, that's the one thing that looks like I could ever compete. I always say that's the one thing that, I love it because I don't have to train it as much, but I'm also 6'3", so my legs and my lower body are just shot where I have to train it into overdrive just constantly to get it to look any semblance like, it's in shape. But what were those body parts for you?
It's such a good point, Ryan, because genetics plays such a big part. I mean, not everything, and that's the whole part of it. That you work on the things that go well, you just want to enhance, and the things that are lagging, you just have to put that extra effort. But like you're saying, if you're tall, if you're lanky, you're going to have that leaner, long muscle, and it's really difficult in some ways. Where you see some of these power lifters that are literally 5 foot by 5 foot by 5 feet, and lifting some incredible amounts, and just huge everywhere, but it's because they're not that tall either. um I've got an interesting story because I remember years ago when Terminator came out, Linda
Yep.
Hamilton, before I'd even thought about bodybuilding, I remember looking at her and saying, oh my gosh, she is my idol. If I could just have arms
Yep.
like her. And then when I started doing the bodybuilding, and within even a year and a half, and I'm looking, I'm going, wow, I'm actually there.
And she has better arms than Linda Hamilton, how everyone. So it's like, yeah, that's how it works.
But so the part that really took off, I would say probably my shoulders. Well, I work. I mean, my shoulders should be 5 times as big as they are, as much as I work them. But once again, that just goes to show how you may think, oh, well, I'm going to lift and lift, and it's going to make me big, and it may not necessarily. My back also. Eventually, my back, I think, is sort of a signature that I've got. The part that is always lagging and always difficult, the legs. It's getting, and part of that can be a female thing. It is for me, especially. I think that the legs, especially for females, are harder towards the end to get that definition and to be able to define. Um, and you have a lot of people who have like an upper body and a lower body. I train, but I have clients that are both competitors, and some that just want to get fitter or better. And sometimes I'll train in two different ways. I'll train your lower body one way and your upper body completely different, just because of how the genetics, come to play.
Yep, unfortunately, that is true, and I always say, calves are probably my biggest problem too, because that's the one thing where genetics. I mean, everyone can say out of one body part that is like 95% genetics. So I always say, like, yeah, if someone has like I don't have like calf envy or anything like that, anyone, but it's just if I see someone in there, that they don't really train it as much because it's just one of those things that really is, you are either born with them or you're not. I mean, I could always say I could inject pure muscle into my calves and they wouldn't grow, an ounce. So it's just, yeah, that's one thing that I would that I've life could probably change if I could. But now, probably one of the biggest myths and stereotypes that I love to bust. I mean, I ask it on every podcast, and we talked about this before we started recording, but it's gotten better the last 5 years with Instagram. But there are still so many women. I always say if I had a nickel for every time I heard this, where they just have that fear still, where, if I go to the gym and I do one push up or I do one pull up or I, do one bicep curl, I'm just gonna, hulk out and put on 50 pounds of muscle. And, I say to that, you'll be the first ever trillionaire, first of all, because everybody and their brother would want to buy whatever you're selling. Then afterwards, I mean, you'd become just such the biggest commodity. But I mean, did you ever have that fear when you were getting started? And even if you didn't, I mean, how do you still respond to that? Because I bet you hear that all the time.
I laugh when we talked about it a little bit earlier because it is so true that that is such a huge fear that a lot of women have, and they'll come up to me and say, "Oh yeah, well, I don't know if I really want to go into the gym because I don't want to be muscular." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness, if I could, I would be double as big as what I am right now, except that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen at all because you have a certain frame. And what nature has given you and what God has given you is how you're going to start developing. So, you can lift as much as, and yes, you'll get defined, you'll grow to whatever your frame is and what you're supposed to. You will not get big and huge. I was never really, I was never worried about that because I actually wanted to get bigger, and that's where, yes, if you look at some of these people that are huge, and where I think a lot of folks get that impression is because there's a lot of steroid usage out there. And but if you are going to do something natural, your body will only grow and build as much as it is meant to be. Anything else has to do with certain enhancements and with certain help that you might be giving it.
Oh yeah, I totally like out of all the guests that we've had on the show. I mean, we talk about that a little bit, but yeah, I couldn't agree more. But I always have to say, there's always that lucky 1%er that I always just hate with a passion, that just genetically they are just built to just be
Yeah.
massive. Yeah, I mean, we had one woman on where I was like, okay, before I had her on, I was like, okay, there's no way that she's natural. But then she had a photo right behind her when she was like 10 years old, and I was like, okay, I was like, damn it, she is. I was like, because there's no way unless she was like doing that when she was like 10 years old. I was like, but just naturally people can just be built like that. And I always tell the story of one of my dad's best friends in college. He helped me a lot through baseball, but he is one of those guys where he doesn't need to touch a weight. He can eat 10 Snickers bars a day, and he does not gain an ounce of fat, and it's all just solid rock. And I just look at him and I hate him with a passion, because whenever we go out to eat, he could flip $100 bill and not put on an ounce the next day, and he's like in his 50s now. So I have no idea. And I always told him, I was like, you need to go to a lab and like get tested by scientists, because like if they find out your genetic pattern and like put it in like future generations, I was like, you would save a lot of people's lives. So yeah, I always
That's
love
great.
to
Now,
say that.
my dad was like that. I mean, he never set foot in a gym once in his life, but he horseback rode, he played tennis, he walked 6 miles a day until even, I mean, he passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 93 years old. And still, he would show a
Yeah.
bicep. Like, Dad, where'd that come from? So, it's those things that sometimes, genetically or otherwise, you just have within you. But very important, when you add the nutrition, and it's not just the kind of nutrition, but it's putting in the workouts and the nutrition and how to space things out. That's when you can start to manipulate and control naturally where the growth is, how the growth is happening, and or leaning out, whatever it might be that you want to do.
Oh yeah, and yeah, again, like whatever she says, everyone, I totally agree. But one of the things that I love to talk about too, along with some of the fears that women have working out, but probably the biggest thing that I think affects women so much more than it does guys, which is why I love to bring it up, is just the confidence boost that working out can give you. Because I mean, let's face it, there's some guys. There could be a 400-pound guy, and he can walk into the gym like he owns the place, and that's just how some guys are. But with women especially, I always say that confidence boost is one thing that you can take from the gym and you can add to every single aspect of your life. How has that been like for you? How have you used that confidence boost and use it to impact other areas of your life?
Huge, huge. And you're so right. And I think one of the most intimidating things initially, especially for somebody who's never been in the gym, or is just walking through that door and seeing, oh my goodness, there are machines, there are free weights, there are accessories like bands and TRX and, all these apparatus. And just like anything, we fear what we don't know, and not knowing how to go about using them. Once somebody can show you around that gym, showing you what to do, at first, yeah, I do believe that you need to have some sort of a trainer, some sort of a coach, just to get you into some of the things that you're going to need to be able to do for later on. Once you do that, well, you can come into your own. And I think for a lot of women and for guys too, but that time in the gym, whether it's 30 minutes or an hour and a half, whatever that is, that's your time. That's your time away from anything else, whether it's the kids, the family, work. It's your time to do what you need to do. I use it almost even to think and to get into myself. Sometimes I go out and do bleachers at this high school over here on weekends. And I come back and tell my husband, yeah, I had a great business meeting with myself. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, well, I'm running and doing my bleachers and doing, but I'm almost having conversations with myself and being able to see, and I take that into my everyday life, whether that is work or whether that is, family or other friends. So I think that's a huge confidence builder, to be able also to tell yourself, wow, I used to be able to do this, whether it's a 5 pound weight, and all of a sudden I'm doing a 15-pound weight. Or if it's getting a plate on each side to do a squat, and then, oh my goodness, now I've got 2 plates. And with weight, you can see the transformation very easily, and it doesn't take that long.
Oh, absolutely. And I always said the one problem though is that, especially with like my generation, where everyone wants the results now and they want them yesterday, where they're not
Yeah.
willing to put in the work. And I always like to make the comparison. I mean, between someone who's trying to lose weight and someone who might be like an alcoholic. If you're an alcoholic and you go one day without drinking, you've already made significant progress. Whereas if you go into the gym for one day and you look in the mirror, you're not going to see any change. So you're just going to be like, oh, I wasted all this time for. But it's just one of those things where it takes weeks upon weeks or months upon months to start to see results. But once you see them, I mean, it can be so positive for you. So that's why, I mean, out of any advice that I can give on this podcast is that just stick with it, people. I mean, it's going to take time. It's not going to be like some magic pill where you can just take it and then all of a sudden the next day you wake up and you're super lean down. I mean, it just takes so much time and effort. But honestly, just stick with it. But one of the biggest myths, I think, too, especially when it comes to prepping, is that I always love to say, I mean, people don't realize that just to be able to get into shape to go on a prep takes so much hard work and determination and dedication. But going on a prep, that is notching things up to an extreme level where it comes down to, I mean, your diet has to be perfect, your nutrition has to be perfect, you have to have all these meals planned. I mean, you cannot miss a single workout. Everything just becomes so scientific. What was that adjustment like for you? Was it something that took a toll on you, or was it something that you had already planned for and been prepared for, so it wasn't that big of an adjustment for you?
It did, but I think looking back, it's sort of been a gradual kind of thing. I remember the first trainer I ever had. I will always remember him, and I always think of him as getting me to the point where then I could take it that step further. And he told me, he said, Monica, I'm going to train you this season, but I want you to learn everything there is to know so that you don't need me anymore. And regardless of who your trainer is, what you're going to do, you've got to follow the plan 100%. Even if it's not 100% for you, but you've got to, you know, um, chronologically, write that down, make sure that you are keeping a log and tabs, because then you can 100% say, yes, this worked for me, or you know what, these things worked but these things didn't. When you try going back and forth and second guessing and, oh, I don't think that food, or I don't like this, no, you've got to 100% set your mind and do it. When I did my first show, it was about, I'm thinking, what was it, maybe about a 7 month, 6, 7 month prep for that first show. Now it started off, with, okay, let's take a couple of things away, let's add this, you're starting from scratch and you're building a certain amount of muscle. But what is really key there is I said, okay, I'm going to do one show. That's it. Bucket list, or what, it hadn't even been part of my bucket list, but let's just go ahead and do this. I did that first show and I actually won the Masters over 45 in figure. And all of a sudden, there was the bug. It just bit me, and I said, okay, I want to do this for a while. And that even shifted my mentality to say, and every year, the way I saw it is, what can I improve? You talked about body parts before. So, do I want to improve this next season on my back or my rear end or my legs or my shoulders, whatever that is? And how can I come in? It's not about even looking at those who are on stage competing with you. It's about looking at yourself in the mirror, looking at those last pictures that you had. The first show I ever did, that was my baseline. So from there, each time, who are we trying to be? That person who is right there. And you know what? The other thing that I tell people too, they say, "Oh, well, I have kids, or you know, I have these commitments or other things." You know what? Life happens. It does, and I always tell everyone, let life happen. If this were a perfect world and a perfect situation, you did everything 100%. We can't do that. Every single year, there is something that will happen in my life, whether it's maybe an injury or maybe family situation or something else that's completely out of my control. That's part of my prep anyway. So I do the best that I can considering the other things that are happening around me, and I try to come in, my best with it. But yeah, right now I'm eating 5 to 6 meals a day every couple of hours. Because I'm about 7 weeks or so away, I've started doing twice cardio a day with a workout. I'll be starting to do posing. So it's about a 3 hour commitment in the gym, not necessarily all at one time, but throughout. And, it's something that I've told myself, okay, this is what I want to do because I want to. And the minute it stops being fun, then you've got to stop it. It's got to be something you want to do.
Absolutely, and I always say to everyone, I mean, find that one thing in your life that you really enjoy like that and just stick with it. Because, like I always say, we're on this planet for such a short period of time, so just stick with it and honestly just follow that dream. But you brought it up, so and I love this is the biggest thing that I would have never guessed in a million years would be such a difficulty for so many of these compares that we have on. But for so many people, they would never realize that for a lot of these compares, posing is the hardest thing for them. I always like to say I'd never in a million years would have guessed that, but I always compare it now to being a good driver. Like you can be a good driver, you can never be a great driver. You can be a good poser, you can never be a perfect poser. It's always something that's always ever evolving. What has your experience with posing been like?
You can work yourself to death in the gym. You can have a fantastic, but you can have your nutrition just so, doing your cardio, doing your workouts, everything. But if you get on that stage and you don't know how to work the stage and you don't know how to present yourself or pose, I don't care how great your body is, you're not going to make it up to that top or top 3 or top 5. So posing is huge, and I think a lot of times people don't realize that, and they say, "Oh, posing, I'll just learn the poses, a couple weeks beforehand." No, it takes a very long time, especially for women just trying to figure out how to get guys. It's easier for them to get their lats out, for example. It took me, I think it was 7 to 10 weeks looking in front of the mirror, saying, "Nothing's happening. I'm breathing. I'm doing this. I'm doing that." And then all of a sudden, one day, "Oh my gosh, there it is. I got it." But you have to go through those motions and do that. Another thing, until I hadn't started posing myself, I thought, "Oh, well, that looks really easy." I mean, yeah, whether it's in heels for figure or physique or bare feet for bodybuilding, no big deal. Oh my goodness. It is, I mean, you should be sweating when you're posing. Your muscles should be so sore as if you had done a workout after the fact. And the day after a competition, my calves are always cramped. My muscles feel as though that I've lifted the heaviest ever before, and it's because you have to hold these things for a certain period of time as well. So posing is huge, 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 huge.
I always say that that's one thing that I never really realized that for a lot of these competitors, like they say, it's the hardest workout that I've ever had. Sometimes it's just the posing sessions that they've had. But what was that transition like going from figure poses to physique poses because for anyone out there that doesn't realize, I mean, they're quite different. What was that transition like for you?
They're all very, very different. So when I started 10 years ago, there was, for women, you had bikini, you had figure, and you had bodybuilding. There was no women's physique initially. And I remember I've actually been through the whole gamut because that's another thing too. If you decide if you want to compete, sometimes it's finding where you fit because something that you may really like because you say, well, that's my personality, whether I want to be the sassy bikini girl or I want to be the more composed figure or the strong bodybuilder. That's okay if that's what you want to do, but your body may or may not um, translate to that. So I really suggest trying a couple of different divisions, seeing not only what you like, but where you fit in, and talking to the judges about it too. So the first couple of competitions I did bikini and figure. Well, after the second bikini, I was like, okay, that's it. That it just wasn't me. And I remember coming in fifth that first competition in bikini and first in figure. And so, the judges were rewarding. I was too hard for bikini. I needed to grow eventually a little bit into figure. Um, then a couple of years later, and then I actually did bodybuilding. But the problem with me was the lightest bodybuilding weights were 115 pounds and I would come in at 99 pounds. And so, 16, even 5 pounds of muscle when you are that depleted and, you barely have any fat on you at all is a huge difference. And at the end of the day, the one who is the biggest and looks the biggest will win. So when physique came out, I'm like, oh, wow, this is awesome. This is great. Um, Once again, I've got to say, so I compete in the INBA, which is the International Natural Bodybuilding Association. I'm a PNBA, which is a Pro Natural Bodybuilding Association. But I also compete in the NPC, which is the largest of the organizations that exist here in the United States, the National Physique Committee. Now, the natural one, the only difference there is that it is tested. So you know that there's a very even playing field. I love competing and I love having sometimes that large draw of people and the big numbers to be able to compete with. So I did compete in both routes. Where do I do the best? What is dear to my heart? The naturals, of course. And that's just because of who I am, a lot of my platform, a lot of what I believe in. Having said that, so the the divisions are slightly different. I'm a very symmetrical person, so that's why figure suits me very well. In physique, which I love because you get to in the NPC you get to go barefoot. In the IMBA you don't. You're actually wearing the high heel shoes while you're doing your physique poses. So it's a more feminine type posing than it would be bodybuilding because it's all open-handed. It's just how the poses are done, which I love and are great. That's where I have been told later on in the natural um, bodybuilding associations, the physique is where I do the best because I cut very lean, and you can really see the definition of those muscles. With the NPC, it's slightly different because you get a lot of the women are a lot thicker, and it's really really at those national levels, it's very very hard to compete.
Oh yeah, at 100%. And one of the questions that I ask, every guest that I have on, whether or not they be, my bodybuilders or my musicians or just any type of guest, is for, some of the bands that I have on. I always ask, what is that feeling like performing live on stage in front of, hundreds to thousands of people? What is that thrill like? But it also applies to the bodybuilders that I have on my show. What is that feeling like when you get to step on stage and you'll show off all of that hard work that you've worked months upon months for?
You know, it's an awesome feeling. And what usually happens with a lot of competitors, I would also always say about 2 to 3 weeks before your competition, that's when all the doubts come to play. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm not ready. I look this way. I look at, your mind, head games, all sorts of stuff come into play. And that's where you really need a great support system on the outside, whether it is your coach, your family, whoever is there for you to remind you, no, 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 you're on track, everything is going okay. the week we call it peak week. Some call it hell week, but it's pretty much peak week, and that's the week before. And that's the one that I always say that's the hardest week of all, because that's when you're water depleting. That's when your diet literally changes from sometimes hour to hour, depending that the changes are so huge. Your metabolism is, really, really ramped in. And it gets to a point sometimes you're like, well, actually you get very, very excited. I mean, that peak week, you're like, okay, now I'm ready. This is great. This is good. And then when you get on stage, I mean, it's a wonderful, amazing feeling, and you're going to go. It's almost like a roller coaster because you're feeling, oh, let's get this over and done with already. It's been so long. Let me just get out there. But the enthusiasm on the day of a competition, the expediters backstage, I don't care which organization you're a part of. I mean, they make you feel amazing. And you have those who are competing for their first time, those who have been competing for a very, very long time. And everybody, you're either big sister or little, you take everybody else on. Being out there on stage, makeup, the clothes, the suit that you're, the sparkles, the bling. It's almost like you get into character, and it is a wonderful, amazing feeling. And the one thing you do have to remember always, regardless, is why are you doing it? What is the purpose of even you getting out there? Because, Ryan, this is a very, very subjective sport. So you have done everything possible, and you go out there, and at the end of the day, you're at the mercy of the judges and what those 7 or 8 or 9 judges want at that particular time. And unfortunately, there can only be one winner. And there are many, many, many other competitors who are all winners because they're all out there and what they've done is amazing. But you've got to remember that. You've got to remember that before, because it can be very disappointing for some people if that's what they went in thinking, this is the placing I want, or this is what I want to accomplish, and they don't get it. So you've got to think about that beforehand too, and really celebrate the achieving of the goals that you've laid out over such a long period of time.
Yeah, I honestly, yeah, that too is just such a huge thing because a lot of people go into that just thinking that, that where they place is kind of where they value themselves at, where they don't realize that, like, hey, just to be able to go on that stage is just so impressive. And I always like to say, being a baseball pitcher myself, believe me, I've had my fair share of
Right.
umpires where, I say to myself, hey, things would have gone a little bit differently had I, got some calls that I didn't have, just that whole type of thing. So yeah, it's all subjective. And again, just getting on stage though deserves so much praise. But one of the most important questions that I love to ask on here is because so many people don't understand this is I always say I've had friends come up to me and say, like, Ryan, I love watching your podcast. But one of the things that they're shocked by is that they don't realize that that look that you present on stage, that is not a sustainable look. You're not going to be able to look like that 365 days out of the year. I mean, I always say so many people just have that myth where they think, these people work their butts off. They must just look like that, 24/7 because of all the hard work that they put in. But when you go to walk on that stage, you are at your weakest point and you are not, a lot of people are not even able to maintain that look for more than a day afterwards. What was that like for you when you realized that, like all of this hard work that I put in, all these months upon months of just working my butt off, I am not going to be able to maintain this look? Was that a struggle for you at all?
Yes, and I think it's a struggle for anyone who gets to a certain point, goes out there, comes back, and we're the hardest on ourselves. And that I'm so glad you brought that point up, because so many competitors um, sometimes can have issues with that later on. And depending on how you've trained, what you've done, how long you've either depleted yourself, or how long you've been, less carb, more carb, that can mess up with your metabolism if you don't have the right person that is coaching you, not only on how to get to where you need to get, but also how you need to sort of reverse it back to everyday normal. And that can only take a couple of weeks. But you have so many. I mean, I'm did the same thing that first year that I competed. I went from nothing to the minute one of the shows. It was actually at the Europa. The second show I did was the Europa here in Dallas, and Ed and Betty Pariso, who have been doing the show for forever and ever, had this amazing buffet but it's a dessert buffet that they put out for the competitors right after. So the first year, and I did the Europa several years, but the first year it's like, oh my gosh, you're off stage and you go and you grab all these cookies and the pastries and and after an hour, you're like, oh, your stomach is not used to any of that. I learned in later years, okay, I'll grab a few things, I'll take them home, and I'll parcel them out over a period of time. But the thing is, you've got to remember especially the last 24 hours, you're also extremely dehydrated. So some of that extra weight loss has to do with the lack of water. I literally within the night when I'm finished with the show, now I don't go out and eat a big meal or anything else. I hydrate. I might go out and I was like, okay, give me a margarita, and I haven't drank in probably several months, so it just takes a very little bit, and I can feel it, and I'm lightheaded, and give me a bunch of water and a drink, and I'm good. But the next morning, I had weighed myself and I had put on 6 to 7 pounds just from the night before, and that's all water. So even from that point, that's a very different way to look at it. Now, from my competition, my stage weight to my off season, I don't stray more than about 14, 15 pounds total. And I think that's a healthy way to do it, to where you are not straining your body to have to lose all this weight later on to get back into shape. And there are all sorts of ways to do it. Of course, the off season, we talk about gaining, and you are eating more and you're putting, but how can I put lean muscle without gaining the fat? The other thing too is you get a lot of women who their coaches will tell them, okay, I'm going to tell you when you're ready to compete. And they string them on in a way for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months doing a diet. You can't do that either, because your metabolism will not want to deal with that. Usually I'll get somebody, I say, okay, let's sit down, let's choose a show that's usually, I say, choose something that's 16 weeks out or a little bit more, depending on where they are. Now it's on you, because you're the one that's going to be half naked on that stage when the time comes. It's not about 8 weeks before saying, oh, I don't think I'm ready, I'm not going to do it. No. Once again, like that initial coach that I had said, I'll give you a program, but I want you to get on stage, because that way you're going to be held accountable. By the same token, you have a certain prep, but then after that prep, you've got to give your body a break from the extremely, extremely strict. Now, healthy lifestyle is great. And I truly believe you can live. I mean, I'm pretty lean all year long. Like I said, I'll gain that maybe 12 to 14 pounds, and I know exactly where it goes. But it's, what do you do afterwards, and what are some of the things that you allow yourself or not? And a lot of competitors can go almost to extremes. They've been deprived ice cream or cake or certain of the sweets, and then they go instead of, and that happened to me. I remember for the first couple of years, until I learned how to um, parcel things out before bodybuilding, because I had celiac disease and things. I didn't like sweets that much, so maybe I'd have a cookie every once in a while. After my first year of competition, I'd look at cookies or cakes or something, and I, instead of having one, I'd have a dozen, just because I'm off season. I can do it. Wait a second, I don't even like this stuff. But your tastes and everything change, so you have to be careful with that.
Absolutely, and I've just heard so many stories about people, the next day or the next week even they put on, like 30 pounds or something because they don't realize that, that that's a thing. And, I like you, I also put on 50 pounds, but I do it for a different reason because being up in Minnesota, during the winter time, you are not going to be, you do not want to be super lean. When it's negative 20 degrees outside, you do not want to be super lean. You will not have a fun time. So yeah, now I'm just about in my cutting phase because now that we're getting to a little bit warmer of a climate. So yeah, I always love to say that. But now also, like, you're a mom. I mean, you've had 4 kids. I love having moms come on the show too because I always say being a mom, that's a full-time job in and of itself. How are you able to balance that and still finding time to have time for yourself and go to the gym? Because one of the things that a lot of the moms that we have on the show, I mean, I know that your kids are older, but a lot of the moms still have that mom guilt where they feel when they're working out that they're not spending time with their kids, that it's really hard for them to get into the gym. What advice do you have for moms out there who are just looking to get into better shape?
I really take my hat off to those moms who, um, I let me back that up. I think everybody can find a certain amount of time, regardless of where you are in that fitness journey. Now, those who decide to compete and who have children who are under the age of 6 or so, oh my goodness, I really bow down to them because I think that's incredible. And I didn't start doing it until my children were that slightly older. Um, to be fit, to be able to take time to the gym, the reason why you need to do it is because if you are okay up here, in here, you'll be able to take care of them better. So you've got, don't think of it as something selfish. Oh, that's I'm taking an hour 3 or 4 times a week of me time. No, that time is extremely important to re-energize the batteries and things for you. Not only that, but if you're in better physical condition, you're going to be able to play with that 2 year old or 3 year old that's incessant and wants you and needs you all the time. If you're eating properly, you're going to have the energy that you need to be able to deal with them. As a mom, it is extremely, extremely important for you to be able to take that time. Now, it might be before the kids get up in the morning, so you might have to do that then. It might be while the kids are in school. It could be during a lunch hour. It might be when hubby comes back home from work and you can have that hour to go. It's about finding that little bit of time and giving you the peace just to be able to do it. You're doing yourself. I truly believe your health is key to your wealth. And wealth isn't just monetary. Your wealth may be all sorts of things, and it might even be that quality time that you spend with your children.
Absolutely. Like I always say, I'd rather be 100 years old than be someone who has $100 million and dies at the age of like 50. So it's always, about having, that just that healthy mindset too is just so important that I just love to preach. But when you are taking a lot of these women in the gym, what advice do you normally have just for women in general, though, too, when they're getting started? Because we have a lot of fear, a lot of intimidation that a lot of women that I have on, when they get started. I mean, and just even for guys too, the gym can be intimidating. But for women especially, what are some tips and tricks that you like to use for people that when they're going to the gym, just to get them a little bit more confident in the gym?
Very good point. Number one, and for everybody, it's different. I think initially it's taking one step at a time. It's being able to go in there and not feel overwhelmed that, oh my goodness, we mentioned earlier about all the kinds of equipment that's there, the goals that I might have. I always say there are 5 steps to attain any goal. And the first of those steps is knowing where you are. Where am I right now in this journey? What can I do? What can't I do? What might I need? Where am I deficient? And it's really recognizing some of those things. The second step is knowing where I want to go. So this is where I am. This is where I want to be. And basically just telling yourself, okay, whatever that goal is in 5 months or this is what I'd like to do, whether it's lose weight, gain weight, because believe it or not, there's some people who want to gain weight. They might be extremely, thin, or you have what I'll call the skinny fat. Those who have, maybe they just don't have any muscle mass that would like to put a little something on. Thirdly, it's make a plan. So we know where we are, we know where we want to go. Now it's about putting that plan together. And that may be going to the gym, it may be getting a trainer, it may be finding out a little bit more how not to be intimidated about going in there. It's about taking one step at a time. Baby steps are wonderful. It's not about looking at the person next to you who maybe has a 10-pound weight and you say, well, I can't even pick up a 2 pound. That's fine. Grab a ball, grab something else. There's so many things that you can do. Not only that, there are ways to do all sorts of exercises, not even at the gym, but at home. Using jugs of water, using a broomstick with jugs on the outside. I do that all the time with some people who say, well, I don't really want to go to a gym or I want to start doing some things at home. You can do that. And I encourage them too. The fourth step, which I think is the most important, is follow the plan. Whatever plan that you set out, you need to follow it. You need to have somebody that'll help you be accountable for, whether it's big steps, baby steps, all of that. And fifth is celebrating your success. But that doesn't mean celebrating that final goal. That means all the little successes that lead along the way. And that is huge. I had this morning, actually, one of my clients is going to be competing for the first time in May, and she has done amazing. She came on about 5, 6 months ago, and she'd never competed in her life. She said, I have this goal. I've had in the past, issues with self confidence and things, and I really want to do this. And I told her, we're going to get this done. Well, she had lost 4 pounds a week ago. And last week she'd wanted to make it under a specific weight, but hadn't quite been able to do so. And she said, Monica, when I get under 180, I'm just going to burst. And I said, okay, you text me, whatever time of day, anything, you just go ahead and do that. So here I'm at 6:20 this morning. I'm on the treadmill myself at home, and I get a text for her. And she shows me it's the scale with her at 179.4. And I'm like, woo! It was just so nice that we have this back and forth, and some of the accountability, and some of the, it's that support system that is so important. And she said, oh, I couldn't have done this without you. And I told her, no, we're a team. And at the end of the day, you're the one doing the work. I'm just there guiding along. So,
And that's so awesome. And two of the questions that I love to ask before we wrap things up, all of our guests. So for our first question, this is always a hypothetical one that I found on the web on the internet a few months ago, and I really love asking it. So if you could go back in time and talk to the 18-year-old version of yourself, what would be the best piece of advice you would give her?
oh, that's a great question. And if I could talk to the 18-year-old, I've always told myself now, and this is advice for anyone, is live life to the fullest and don't regret anything. And I really have tried to live my life that way. And if I were to go back to that 18-year-old, I would basically tell her, stick to what you thought then, don't change anything, and it is worth it. Live every minute to the fullest. Don't want to take 5 steps ahead. Trust the process, enjoy the journey. There will be good and bad, but every single thing that comes along, there's a reason, a purpose for it, and it's going to mean something. Even if you don't know what it is now, it'll all come full cycle later on.
Absolutely. And now, lastly, is there anyone that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Oh man. Well, of course, I've got to give a shout out to my husband, Greg. I would love to then go ahead, give some shout outs to Greg Whiteley, who was that initial trainer that I told you about. Mandis Buckle is one of the trainers that got me completely to a different a different level later on. Jody Miller, who is a
I've
competitor.
had her on here too.
Have you had
Yeah.
Jody?
Mhm.
Okay. Jody was my first posing coach, and I knew Jody way, way back when she actually was competing with the PNBA, and she was the sweetest. A couple of years ago, when I became Miss Olympia, she said, "From one to another, congratulations, love, 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 Jody." Then my trainer last year, Joe Fantauzzi, who once again took me to another level. Love to give him a shout out, and to really my family for sticking by me, for putting up with me when I'm not in the best of moods. So all that. And I'm very excited now. I've just become a brand ambassador both for Official Better Bodies, which they are they're actually from Sweden, but they have their headquarters out of Destination Dallas here in Dallas, which is my home away from home. And then Gains in Bulk, I'm an ambassador for them. One thing I love about them, they're plant based, and they do not use any sucralose in their products. And I know we don't have time for that now, but especially for women, there's some research out there that shows that sucralose can affect Hashimoto's disease in women. So you need to really try to stay away of sucralose as a sweetener as much as possible.
Absolutely. And again, I highly recommend everyone go and give her a follow on Instagram. I'll leave a link down below. And she also has a YouTube channel and a page where she talks with her husband about a lot of issues. Where she gets more in depth than we could get on this podcast here. So I highly recommend everyone go and check those out. I'll leave a link to all of her stuff down below. And again, Monica, thank you so much for coming on. We really, really appreciate having you on. And it was great to have you on and hear your story.
I loved being able to chat with you, Ryan. It was great. Thanks so much for
Absolutely. So again, you guys, this is Ryan Johnson, DD on the spot, signing out. Have a great day, everyone.